Great. We have a lot of people joining us from across Ireland today, it looks like, from Philadelphia area, from New Jersey. So it's a really intercontinental little group we have. So it's very exciting. We'll see what learnings are shared across.
Okay, I think we're ready to go.
Great. Let's get us started, Naomi. Go for it.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you. We've got looks like about 58 on at the moment, which is great considering the amazing weather. So thank you all for joining us and for bearing with us while we wrestle with the tech. So I'm going to just make sure you can hear us clearly. If you want to comment in the chat, if you have any issues, please do that. Is everyone okay? Oh, we're still doing introductions. So the first slide, just to go quickly back on that for people that are joining us, was just to make sure that your name is visible and that you introduce yourself in the chat. So what your name is, your organization, and then what you think our cities need to stop, start, and continue. So you can see there's a lot of activity there in the chat already. And so maybe I'll pass it over to Marissa now to explain a bit about us.
Hi, everyone. So a lot of you know Connect the Dots, but for those of you who don't, we're an organization that focuses on stakeholder and community engagement. We are particularly focused on that for the purpose of sustainable and equitable impact. And at Connect the Dots, we really believe, like most of you, or all of you, I'd say in this chat, that we live in a world where citizens are involved in designing their cities and spaces. And we really believe that the careful engagement of all voices in a collaborative and thoughtful way is really critical when forming solutions to the challenges we're facing and to moving forward with confidence and trust and in a really equitable way that makes cities built for and with people. So the reason that we wanted to bring everyone together today is that, as we all know, the lens of how we're looking at cities and towns is changing constantly in this new era of coronavirus, Black Lives Matter protests, and there's just a lot coming up for people in terms of that we're in this increasingly fragile world, and there's a pressing need to think about cities and towns from a different lens. And we're really interested in Connect the Dots and thinking of cities and towns not just as economic hubs, but as places shaped for and by people. And we brought everyone together with speakers from both Ireland and the US to discuss how we can really seize this moment for cities to refresh, to rethink, and to do better. So we're seeing a lot of local authorities and communities reacting quickly, being more innovative and risk-taking. And we'd like to look at in what ways we can innovate and in what ways we can work together to create these more livable, equitable, and sustainable cities. And as you can see on the slide, it's really about, more than ever, we need to explore everything from the perspective of what we can do, not what we used to do. So that's what today's about. It's about having that space to pause and to think forward and to think proactively.
Okay, thanks, Marissa. So this is basically a little bit more of the reason why, but I suppose we're seeing this new wave that we feel is an opportunity to catch it now that we've had a bit of a standstill, really, that we can, and we're seeing it already. People are starting to take advantage of this moment to reimagine everything and the way we used to do things. So we wanted to just take a chance to take stock and do that with yourselves. We realized a lot of our work was very much around sustainability, equity, areas around climate change. So we really felt the need to become more advocates for this and as well just align ourselves with a community that's already very much about this as well. So we're all around how do we tackle climate change in cities and how do we make sure people are brought on board in the process. So I suppose today we just wanted to address that we're quite aware we're probably preaching to the choir, but I suppose there's values of that choir and being able to really pull together at a time like this and align our values and align what we want to be pushing for moving forward so that we're not kind of regressing back into the way things were usually done. We're obviously all about collaboration. So again, it's all about making progress together and connecting our own dots. So we have a huge range of people from different backgrounds in public sector and private sector. And we really want to make sure that everyone's able to come together and collaborate and learn from each other. And then continuing this dialogue long after. So, making sure that this isn't just a once-off situation, that we were able to kind of keep this momentum going. So this is the brief agenda. So I hope you guys can all hear me. Please do let me know if you can't. we're obviously doing some introductions. There's obviously a lot of you on the chat, so please keep going with your introductions as to who you are, what you think our cities should stop, start, and continue. Then we're going to go into some introductions of the speakers, our wonderful panel. And then we have 3 themes we've broken this down into. So our first one is around public space and public realm. And we've obviously put green and blue infrastructure in there. We have a chance for Q&As. We have a chance to also spotlight some audience members as well. Then the second theme is movement and transport. So all modes and methods of getting around our cities. And then the last one is stakeholder and citizen engagement, which is very much our bag and our focus of interest. And that's really just focused on the importance of the insights and about iteration and taking risks. Again, an audience Q&A at the end of that. And then we'll do a quick summary and conclusion because we're conscious we want to get you guys out of here by 4:30. Okay, so one thing I suppose for setting the stage or setting the panel, this is our one of our first time using Crowdcast, so it's going to be a learning curve for all of us. So I hope you'll bear with us with any technical issues we might have, but we felt this would hopefully be the most interactive way for everyone. The way we have to do it is there's only 4 people allowed on the screen, so there's a kind of a 4 faces rule. Myself and Marissa will be on it throughout, and so we're taking 2 speakers at a time. So we will kind of rotate them around. So you only really hear and see people once they're on the panel. Everyone else is kind of just participating in the background. So you, the participants, can comment in the actual chat in terms if you have any comments to make. If you want to ask any questions, there's a specific button for that to the left of the chat. Then you can also answer polls, which again is to the left of the chat, and you can upvote other questions that people are asking. So we recommend you do that so that we can start to see over time and throughout all of the conversations, just keep the comments flowing, keep the questions flowing, keep upvoting and responding to polls throughout, so that as we get to our Q&A section as well, we can see the momentum building and we can see what the main kind of questions are. And then at some point we're going to kind of maybe spotlight people here and there. If you're up first, there's no pressure. So I'm conscious of the time. I want to just do a quick introduction of all our panelists. I'm going to get them to do their own quick introduction now in a second. So let me just stop screen sharing for 1 second. Let me get back on. These are our wonderful panelists. This is Noel Dempsey, Dovie McDowell, David Vega, Bara Showitz. I'm very sorry. I hope I said your name right. Katrina Johnson-Zimmerman, Claudia Haro. Sorry, I should have checked with you the pronunciation of that. George Boyle and Denise Cahill. So I will just get let me see. Kirsten is our wonderful woman in the background here rotating up panelists. So if you wouldn't mind, Kirsten, we'll get people started. Let me just see now who's up first. So sorry now. We'll get Noel up first. And George.
I think one thing to say as we're waiting is that we do hope that this is the first of many conversations as well, and to try to make it more and more collaborative over time. This is kind of about setting the stage to start.
Brilliant. So I think we've got George up. Do you want to do the honors? Just a brief intro for yourself.
Okay, so my name is George Boyle. I'm an architect. I also founded an organization, a community-based CLG nonprofit called Fumbly Exchange. This was a recession response vehicle at the last recession in 2010 to help creative professionals to shine. And I think that cities, I'm very, very conscious of cyclical movements among economies across the world, and cities need to stop getting stuck in the kind of treadmill of being blinded by the profit organizations, particularly in stronger economic times. So they need to stop letting profit drive development. I think that is a very, very quick way of summing it up. And cities need to start properly supporting the diverse and local-based cultural innovation groups that drive reinvention, paradigm shifts, and pivots at times like we're in now. These are my favorite times to be in, when change is inevitable. And to continue, one of the things that I noticed in the last 10 years happening across the world is cities beginning to become more self-conscious, and self-consciousness brings consciousness, brings identity. So to continue developing their brand-focused awareness of themselves, because I think through this they manage to recruit the right people into the right kind of formative roles that help drive development of a more orderly kind.
Brilliant. Thanks, George. Okay, so I'm going to get up. We're waiting for Noel. I'll ask Denise. She can come up. And I might have to say goodbye to you, George. I'm just going to...
No problem. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. And we'll just try as well for Davi as well. Oh, there's Denise.
Will I speak?
Yes, please. Introduce yourself. Thanks, Denise.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Denise Cahill. I'm the Healthy Cities Coordinator here in Cork. So my background and profession is health promotion. In terms of cities, what I would stop is planning cities around cars. What I would start is investing in making children the center of planning. So I suppose the line I love is that children are the indicator of species for a livable city. And what I would continue is to strengthen community participation processes, strengthen community projects and initiatives that have a say in the planning process of a city.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Everyone's speaking our language.
Davi, I don't know if we can see him, but Denise, I'm going to say goodbye to you now.
Perfect.
We'll hear from you again. Thanks. And while we have Davi hopefully coming on now in a second, I'll just ask for Katrina to join us, and then maybe David. So let me just see. Good to be testing this out, guys. Seems to have jammed. Okay, we'll try it again. Hi, Katrina.
Hi.
How are you?
Thanks for having me. So my introduction, my name is Katrina. I have an independent consultancy, Think Urban. I'm an urban anthropologist, and I'm a collaborator with Connect the Dots in Philadelphia, in the US, with Marissa in particular. And my stop for cities is essentially sort of limiting ourselves through the systems that we put in place. Cities should sort of see this opportunity to open up on the way that they think about those kinds of frameworks that are very rigid. We should start thinking like an ecosystem. So thinking more broadly and holistically in that way, and sort of build our systems around that. But we should continue caring for each other. And that, I think, in the pandemic, we've definitely seen with regards to how we can move systems aside momentarily in order to feed or house or give healthcare to people who really need it in a public health crisis.
Perfect. Yeah.
Thanks,
David, you want to head on from there?
Sure. Yeah. And I'm David Vega Barakowitz. I'm an associate with an architecture and design studio in New York City called WXY Studio. Just in terms of my background, trained as an urban planner and urban designer, and really with a focus on public spaces and really rethinking streets and transportation networks. In terms of what I would stop, I think it's critical, especially for cities in the U.S. that have entrenched inequalities, regionally, and are really seeing significant challenges to sort of the way that they've kind of done business typically. Stopping kind of single family and exclusionary zoning practices, I see as really critical for cities to really be rethinking the way that they're structured and the way that they've been kind of thinking about their land use policies historically. I think that we need to start thinking regionally There's a real, I think, tradition of strong regional planning in the UK and in Europe. In the United States, that's not something that we've seen as prevalent or as strong, and it could open the opportunity to really have a more comprehensive view, not only in terms of biodiversity, sustainability, and conservation, but also in terms of partnerships for better transportation delivery, better service delivery across regions. And then in terms of continuing, I think, just to echo what some of the other folks have said, this particular moment has just opened up a kind of flexibility that is really special, especially in the way that we're thinking about public space, open streets programs, rethinking curbsides. I want to see that continue. I want to see cities doubling down on that. And I think it's a really exciting trend. Thanks.
Thanks, David. I'm gonna boot you off, say goodbye, and hear from you again. Thank you. Hi, Noel.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm next, am I?
You're next. You're up.
Okay. Just Noel Dempsey, a former government minister in Ireland, in the areas of transport, environment, communications, all areas I think that are important in the city of the future. In terms of the questions about stopping, starting, and continuing, I'd say we need to stop building more roads or laneways for cars. We actually need to make it less and less attractive to bring cars into city centre areas. We can do that in a whole range of different areas, obviously by increasing pedestrianisation, introducing congestion charging, using technology to favour cyclists, pedestrians, and so on. I think we need to start using water in our cities much, much better than we do currently. And that doesn't just mean by repairing leaks, as we tend to focus on. It means by having water harvesting plans, by using that water to create spaces, green spaces in our cities and in our neighbourhoods. And continue, I think what we need to continue is to accelerate the rollout of public transport suitable to the configurations of various cities. It does vary from city to city, obviously, but our cities have to be smart, efficient, green, and connected.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Noel. It's great. Just had Claudia join us there. I don't know if you can hear us okay. I know we can see you anyway.
I can. Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Great, okay. So my name is Claudia Horo, and I'm an anti-racism speaker and educator, and I also sit on the board of the Irish Network Against Racism. So my stop for cities is, I think, we need to stop assuming that cities function the same for minorities as they do for everyone else, and recognize that they're very different spaces for minorities. We also need to stop minimizing people's experiences. My start would be that I feel we need to start centering inclusion and empathy as vital elements of city planning. And my continue, sorry, I'm trying to keep these very short. My continue is that I think members of the majority population need to continue educating themselves on how racism manifests in our cities, and addressing bias and checking privilege while we're doing that.
Brilliant. That's great. Really concise. Really good. Thanks, Claudia. Hopefully we can get Davi on the screen, but we'll see how we go. We might have to wait and come back to him. Oops. So in the meantime, I might just plow on, and we can always get Davi's intro once we go into the first theme. So Claudia, I'm going to say goodbye to you for the moment, and thanks for your input. And I'm going to just introduce, so the first theme we have is around public space, public realm. So I suppose, this whole period has brought up a huge amount of reimagination and a revaluing and a reevaluation of streets and spaces, and an increased importance, I suppose, has been placed on specifically blue and green infrastructure in terms of health and well-being. So green spaces and rivers, having the space to really recreate. And I suppose the quick reactionary changes in the public realm show us a huge amount, I think, about the fact that, you know, there are huge demands and huge design challenges on public space in terms of more space for people, that, you know, they're already congested cities. So creating more space for walking, moving, as a tool for economic recovery, to make sure that, you know, shops and businesses can stay open. And I suppose that we need to be restructuring it now in a more equitable way and in a more accessible way, for all users of the city. So all levels of ability as well. So that's my blurb. That's my little intro to that. I want to actually, Dovie is first up on that. I don't know if you're able to hear us, Dovie. Maybe while we're waiting for your audio, we might get Katrina up. So Katrina, you're our next victim. 1 second now.
Okay. I think it's been interesting just to intro with Katrina as well, which Churchill mentioned, but we're actually working with Katrina on some work around repurposing space as a tool for equitable economic recovery. We recently got a Knight Foundation grant with Katrina and Stay to really look at how we can reimagine a district and help them recovery, and also in terms of developing a resilient vision for South Street. But go ahead, Katrina. Don't want to ruin your intro.
No, that's okay. What question should I be answering in particular with that project? Sorry.
Yeah, so I think particularly around just how we think we can use space, like one innovation or idea we can use space to help cities right now. And we're definitely going to take that.
And this definitely bleeds over into transportation as well. But, you know, our streets are some of our largest public spaces that we have in cities. And they are public, and they should be used and shared by everyone who inhabits a city. You know, pretty easy to start with. But obviously we're seeing now with the need for spacing, also the need for not being indoors, we're really suddenly reimagining our streets to be outdoor dining spaces, play spaces, better modes of transportation that are distant via bike or walking or wheelchair or however you want to get around. And so really reimagining those spaces and thinking about what people want to see there, that kind of bottom up improvement in a public realm is crucial to the health of a city, to really be, you know, people focused in a way that isn't just top down prescription. And I think, to speak to our research very briefly as well, a lot of that has to do with qualitative research as opposed to quantitative. And that's, as an anthropologist, as a cultural, you know, anthropologist, that's really important for me to always be pushing out there, because I think it gets missed a lot in the conversation. It's not just about how many people or how efficient something is. It's really about the quality of the experience, and knowing that we're putting that first in the sense of the humanity of the space that is being created by and for the people of the city.
I think that really speaks to the idea of just using new metrics to evaluate how cities work, and that they should be more socioeconomic metrics working for people and for quality of life, and not just metrics, say with transport, just about capacity or frequency or efficiency, but actually about, did this work for people? Did this reach and help vulnerable communities? And other metrics that we can test through that kind of qualitative research and qualitative engagement work.
Yeah, and it starts with just being on the ground, for that matter, too. And I think that we've been advocating for that for decades in our cities with regards to not just a top-down lens, but even still, it's not built into the process necessarily to be present, to evaluate by observation through the experience, and also sharing that experience, like participatory observation, which sounds very, you know, wonky and academic, but is really just being present in the space and fully observing and understanding it for yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm still trying to get Dovie up. So we'll see. I'm going to try it again. But thanks, Katrina. I'm going to see. Maybe while we're waiting as well, if anyone has specific questions for Katrina as well, around especially around the project they have in Philadelphia going on.
Want to explain a bit more about that, Katrina? Because that might speak to some of the people in the room around economic recovery in cities.
Definitely. So a lot of it is a logistical challenge that we're talking about, but in reality, we're thinking about systems change, right? So once you have the ability to make these changes, if you're testing them, if people are getting acclimated to them, then the potential really is to keep that going. And that's the big picture conversation around this, because once you change the way that the relationship structure is between the governance versus the people in the city that are not, not planners, not professionals, then that can be propelled into the future as well. And that is fantastic, because then people get used to that. Then they also get used to contributing, and they get used to the trust building, that can happen where their voice is actually heard. And that principle in action is the right to the city, which also gets into much of the transportation conversation later. But it really is about, if you're an inhabitant, like if you are living here, then it's a responsibility of the systems around you to take care of you. And it's your right to be able to demand a better living environment as a human being, as somebody who can't change a street necessarily by yourself or whatever have you, or a park or a plaza. And then the people in charge of that have the essentially moral responsibility to listen to the people and make those changes. So that's the relationship structure that hopefully will be built through this pandemic process.
Yep. And it's exactly about, I think, meeting people where they are is what we've talked about, Katrina and Naomi, with a lot of our work. It's how do we actually make sure that we're getting that diverse public input, because people really feel part of their cities and that it's built for them. And that's that consistent outreach as well. It's not just once off for a project and then you're gone, but it's consistently working with people to create cities. I know, George, you do a good bit of work around that element as well. Do you want to jump in with your thoughts around public realm in this?
I suppose, yes. I mean, I think the thing about public space for me is that it's like algae. It kind of, it propagates with or without design. It just happens. Even in war-torn civilizations, you find that places get used by people in ways that they invent themselves. And I think there's two systems at play here. There's the kind of life-affirming, kind of life-giving systems, which are organic and are driven by the grassroots and the culture and the kind of way things happen on the street. And then there's the more, I suppose, structured, kind of more mechanical system, which is more about regulation and targets and observation and computation. And of course, between the two now, we have so much more sophistication in how we can watch these things develop. From my perspective, I suppose, by using the Fumbly Exchange as an inside-outside machine, by helping people to rebuild their lives as individuals or as small businesses, but to kind of demand from them back some kind of participation in the urban environment, in the public realm, and in how communities cohere together. It helps to break down that defensive barrier of people in a recession or in a kind of an economic kind of pullback, becoming very protective of what they have and hiding behind their barriers. What's really interesting to me now is that the opportunities provided by COVID are immense, because instead of allowing people to hide in clusters behind barriers, the drive is to get out into the streets, because that's where social distancing is more possible. So if the streets and the public realm, the spaces between places, can be divided into little kind of, I suppose, territories, I'm kind of saying in my narrative, like the gulls or the cormorants on a rock in the Kerry Islands, there's millions and millions and millions of them, but they each have their own little patch. And that patch depends according to the time of year, the time of day. It can actually be puffins one part of the year, and then cormorants, and then gannets, So the thing is that you can have a part of the street that's used as a drop-off zone for schools at certain hours, and rush hour traffic with cars and bicycles and hoverboards and I suppose space machines or whatever it is that we're looking at into the future, things that go on tracks or fly in the sky. And then those spaces can be kind of handed over to the public realm for cafe space, for circulation space, for encounter space during the day. And it's through those areas of encounter and serendipitous exchange that cities become the crucible of equality that I was talking about earlier, where, you know, nowhere else in human encounter is there this juxtaposition of yin and yang, where the poor and the rich and the, you know, the indigenous and the global and the big and the small all kind of rub shoulder to shoulder, and the barrier between them becomes so permeable, so you can kind of move from one to the other without well, I suppose once that's facilitated, once the bias and privilege are also in balance, then it's got this extraordinary ability to create this kind of I suppose a kind of an iconic movement channel. But what I was working on in the last recession was looking at old buildings that have lost their functionality, and most of these are actually enormous spaces that don't kind of convert that easily into regular housing or office space. And I think one thing that cities across the world could really learn from and use as a kind of almost constructed artificial generator of all this is something that we called the generator. I was working with the health organizations, the HSE in Ireland, and some political parties on making a kind of water-based health centre in each city. So a place where intergenerational exchange can happen, because with the demise of the church and the demise of the community centre and the bingo hall and all these places, there's very few places where generations mix and mingle together, where people from different backgrounds mix and mingle together. And by focusing that on mental and physical wellness, according to whatever the COVID guidelines, obviously, that are being brought in here, and by basing it around water, which I think somebody else said is our absolute kind of untapped resource, you can draw all these things together. And by having a kind of a wellness centre, you're kind of preempting a health crisis, but you're also surrounding it with nonprofit and cultural and heritage entities that can feed off that and can help people to know that they're never alone.
George, thank you so much. That was incredible and so eloquent and so brilliantly put. Can we vote for you for president? I'm just conscious. I had so many questions, but I'm conscious of time, and I just want to get the next speakers on to say their piece. But I think we can definitely come back to some of those points you raised. I think the chat was going 90 over there from what you were saying. So I'll say goodbye to Katrina and George for the moment, and we'll get the next speakers up, David and Claudia, I think. I hope. Yeah. Thanks, Siobhan. I think definitely. I think we need to. I think while we're waiting, I think that definitely that idea of how crucial the spaces are now, I think, needs to be raised up to a level where leadership is viewing it that way, and so therefore spaces will be designed in that way, and legislation will be created in that way. So okay, we've got everyone here. Thanks, David and Claudia. So David and I suppose for both of you guys, we were asking questions around innovative ideas that you've seen or that you've been working on that you see bringing forward to bring our cities into the future, really, and what challenges they may face and what ways we can mitigate them. So I know it was all very big and lofty, so if you want to just break it down, feel free to just respond to that in whatever way you want. So David, do you want to go first, maybe?
Sure, thank you. And really appreciate the last speaker's words. Very, very inspirational.
So, hard on to follow, sorry.
I'm based here in New York City, and so I'll share a little bit of my experience in terms of, you know, what I've seen change in really interesting and I think profound ways in terms of the process of public space delivery. And so, you know, typically in New York City, if you want to close a street or have a sidewalk cafe, that can be a process that lasts anywhere from 7 months to, you know, upwards of 2 years. And it requires a significant level of organization. Most of the time, the city wants to partner with kind of a known entity that they know can maintain, design, and sort of roll out these kinds of spaces in a very sophisticated way. And as a result, you know, businesses that maybe aren't as kind of well-resourced or don't have a kind of representative or a network aren't always able to take care of that kind of process and really, you know, participate in that. And what the COVID crisis in New York especially, I think, has opened up is a potential shift that I'm seeing from a kind of traditional public-private partnership to sort of direct government to people partnerships. And so what happened in New York is they started basically saying for the sort of two signature programs, one open streets called Open Streets, kind of closing down streets for people to exercise and have open space. And the other open restaurants for restaurants to take over space on sidewalks and curbs. Basically, they invited businesses and people to sort of self-certify and really take a degree of ownership and management over their streets as public spaces that is completely unconventional and basically takes a 7-month process and makes it a 2-day process. While certainly there are, as somebody who's worked in city government, there are sort of larger questions around liability, safety, and sort of protecting public health and welfare. It's amazing to see these kinds of experiments hit the ground and to see the fact that things aren't falling apart, that people are learning new skills in terms of place management, in terms of public space management, that there can be these kinds of unique direct government to people partnerships that are unconventional, that don't necessarily fit a sort of precise rubric, that maybe go a little bit beyond traditional standards, but that are an incredibly powerful and effective mechanism for making streets work for people in a much, much bigger way and reaching a far broader spectrum of the population. And so that, in terms of an innovative idea, in terms of something that's unique and positive coming out of this COVID period, is something that I want to see more of. And hopefully, this experiment can teach cities that new process and systems of delivery can really be scalable and can really work for everyone. So.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for contributing that in. I totally agree. And I think one thing I forgot to say to the speakers is that I'm going to raise my hand if you guys are going on longer than we need to wrap something up. I'm going to just wave at you frantically. So that's something to bear in mind. But you guys have been all very concise and succinct. So, but I think just around that partnership idea between kind of citizens and the municipality, or whatever it is, the government, the local, I mean, that's very much playing into, I think, Claudia, when we look at new migrants and new communities in Ireland, in any city, you'll have more and more now, we're going to have an influx of diversity and people that aren't just the natives or the whatever, and how do we, if we can't even effectively collaborate with anyone currently, how are we going to keep going in this way? That's kind of my big kind of question. I don't know if you have thoughts on that or other stuff that's been commented on before.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry, are you?
Sorry,
sorry, David, go ahead.
Me here first.
Sorry, I should be very clear. Claudia, sorry, I should have a little sign. Sorry, David, I'll let you jump in then.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Emil. No, I agree. I think, if we look at Dublin specifically, I think over the years, I mentioned I sit on the board of the Irish Network Against Racism, and INA are going since '97. And I think over the years, have tried, and I should say, maybe not had much success in, trying to collaborate and I suppose encourage more joined up thinking between city planners and, all the different parties involved. Have really struggled with that over the years. And I think looking at, say, Dublin specifically, one of the things that we've been trying to encourage is, bystander intervention, for example, as a response to racist incidents, or just as an effort to making the city centre more inclusive. But the issue, I guess, with focusing on bystander intervention is it somehow relies on spontaneous support from people and takes away from, the fact that inclusion needs to be part of the planning in the first place, and systems need to take care of people rather than us. Like I said, us relying on that intervention from individuals when something happens. I think the INAR have currently the only online racist incident tool, and that's called the ireport.ie. So from the iReport, we see that minorities in Dublin city centre specifically, or just in general in Ireland, are already doing an awful lot, or as much as they can, to protect themselves. So, for example, our data shows us that a large majority of minorities actually don't go out at night, for example. So, one of the assumptions that's often made about some of the reports of racism that you hear about is that these must be happening at night, or where alcohol is related, or in spaces that are considered largely unsafe. This is not the case. So I have maybe a couple of stats that that I wanted to share with everybody. So the majority of racist incidents would take place on the street. So 44 so I should say these are looking at from June to December 2019. 44 incidents of racism took place on the street, and 15 of those were violent. I just want to highlight as well that these took place in the daylight, while people were going on their way to work or going home, over their lunch hour, or 32 incidents, for example, took place on buses and trains. 11 of those took place on the bus specifically, and they were violent, and some of those were directed towards the drivers. 19 incidents took place in workplaces. 3 of those were violent. But really also want to draw attention to the fact that 14 of them took place while shopping. So and 5 of them took place while going to school. So all of these are taking place during the day. They're all taking place in public spaces. So the assumption, I suppose, that I mentioned before, that they're happening at night or in spaces that aren't safe or whatever, it simply isn't true. I think the reports that we do have, say, from incidents happening at night, tend to be around refusal of entry into pubs or clubs and restaurants as well sometimes. So I suppose, like I mentioned earlier, it's interesting that INAR over the years have had such difficulty actually bringing people together, trying to encourage this collaborative thinking around city space. And what's interesting in what has happened since the murder of George Floyd in America, and how much it has ignited people in Ireland, is, INAR, for example, we had a board meeting this morning, and I think the staff reported a 1,000% increase in interaction with our social media, our website. Our phones are absolutely hopping, so I guess now maybe there is a bit of, people are ignited. I hope people are ignited into action, and I would just love to see. I would love to see how that manifests, and I would love to see a move away. And I think, as a couple of the speakers have mentioned already, a move away from a sort of profit-led, maybe developer-led way of looking at city spaces, and a real focus on something that's inclusion driven and empathy driven, and, as I think Katrina says, a real focus on looking at the quality of the experience, and the quality of life that people have in city spaces, and also what some of the metrics are. I think Marissa maybe mentioned about what some of the metrics we're using to measure that, and are we measuring social impact, for example, and how? Sorry, I don't know if you're waving at me. Am I talking to?
I was like a little tiny wave of like
a little wave. Okay.
No, I didn't want to cut you off, because it's all really important stuff, and really important that we're aware of this information. Because and I suppose what's hovering in my head is just that it's all very, and unconsciously want to move it to the attendees to ask questions, but that it's all around behavioral change. A lot of this that we're discussing, especially what everyone's really discussed, is behavioral change. And I'm just doing a course at the moment on that, in terms of co-creating sustainable behavioral change with communities. And I think that we just, the first thing we assume is that information is the only way, oh, once they have the information, then we can change. And that's actually not true at all. Like, just doing a campaign for raising awareness does actually nothing. They've proven that it does nothing. That, of course, information is great and it is power, but it's what you do and how you change the behavior is much more complicated. And I think that we need to start thinking about that in terms of how we use space in a social way, because I would argue that we've created public spaces to be antisocial. They've been designed in an antisocial manner. And then that then perpetuates these antisocial behaviors. So, and also in the way that they've been developed, they've been missing in that crucial piece of consultation, which is what Connect the Dots is all about, is that consultation piece then allows for ownership over space.
And
so Marissa,
diverse input's critical within there. So I think even, there's probably been less even in the past of an emphasis on really diverse public input and really making sure that every voice is heard, from more vulnerable communities, from communities more on the outskirts traditionally, and making sure that those voices, not just the loud ones, but also the quiet ones, are involved. That reminds me of what George was saying around how streets have that capacity to be this like unifier and this place where everyone goes through and can be part of it. But right now, streets are designed that it feels very unsafe for some members of the public to be part of them, like Claudia was saying, even during the day. So it's kind of that there's a full redesign that's needed as well to make sure that people can really, that streets can have that kind of trust building power that they could have, which Jane Jacobs used to talk about, and now are really aren't having that because there's so many incidents too.
Yeah. So I'm gonna see, I know there's been a flurry of activity. We were hoping to pull up an attendee, and David, I'm sorry, we're gonna come back to you as well now. So I'm gonna actually maybe say goodbye to all the speakers for now so that we have room for an attendee to come up. And thanks so much for your contributions. And then we can get anyone up from the audience. That was our initial idea. Marissa, did you want to jump in?
I think we're going to start with Tig on the chat.
Okay, perfect. Great. I know I saw Tig feverishly typing away there in the chat. So we'll get him up to maybe ask a question or two from the speakers we've had so far. So is that happening now? I'm just seeing. Okay, great. He's connecting. Okay, great. So I don't know if we were going to run a poll or anything now just while we're waiting, but oh yeah, he's up here. Great. Hi, Tig. Oh,
so we're working.
Can you hear us? Tig? No, maybe it's not working.
Sorry, I can't.
Oh.
Do you want me to ask the question?
Yeah, please. Can you hear us?
Okay. We can have him just ask it. So we're working with Tig on a Go Green Routes project, which is an EU-funded project focused on green.
The question is, how do we encourage municipalities to catch up with the public attitudes? Because right now the public are literally screaming, or as in the case of a certain Irish city, sitting down and protesting for change. And it's really interesting, the municipality structures around consultation may not be up to speed for the rapid type of change that the public want. So is there any way we can encourage city councils and municipalities to engage in more rapid processes?
So Tig, do you want to direct that at one of the speakers in particular, or should we direct that at I'm thinking of people that might work with councils at the moment, like Noel or Denise, or did you have a particular?
Yeah, Denise said she might jump up.
Yeah.
From the Connect the Dots perspective, I think a key thing we've been looking at is kind of longer visioning and engagement processes, so that it becomes this real two-way conversation that's just intrinsic in how processes work in cities. So that's why we're doing a lot of advocating for this. And I think from another perspective, it's as changes are made, it's integrating those feedback loops throughout it so that, again, people are constantly in that process. I'm sure, Denise, you can speak to that more from your work in Cork.
I think it's a great question, and I think it's the crucial question. I've been sitting here going, this is what we have to be talking about. Because traditionally, local authorities, planners engage with people just by having an open night in a local hotel, and they invite people in and they present their idea, and I suppose they take the feedback, but you wonder how much of it gets translated into action. And I suppose that's where we're trying to change things in Cork a little bit. through the Healthy Cities model and through the structure that we have. So if we want to, like a lot of people are talking there about blue spaces as a public space and green spaces, we're trying to do a lot of work around that in terms of health in Cork. And what we're doing with the river is we're looking at the river as a space for play and activity, because that multiplies the recreational space of the city, and it's so easily overlooked. For me personally, the River Lee, like, I look at it and I love it and I see it's part of our city, but do I engage with it? I don't. So what we're doing in Cork to try and get that parity of esteem between planners and people on the ground and the community is we've brought them all together to do some placemaking training, so that there's relationships being built, and that the planners and the architects and the recreational staff of the City Council are hearing the issues from the people who use the river. So the river users, the boat clubs, the swimmers, the anglers are all on this together, and the process is a 6-week process. We're getting training online. We're hoping to do it in a workshop in person, but we've to switch it to online. And we're only 1 week in, but our ambition with it isn't to transform the river necessarily. For me, it's about building the relationships and building the understanding, and I suppose building a working connection, because for years I've been hearing from the river people, you know, they just don't listen. They see the river as a problem. They lock it up. They close the gate. They don't let us on the public pontoon. They don't let anyone do anything. It's all insurance, insurance, insurance. So unless you start getting people in together and co-planning and looking at it as making it a place for everybody to interact, you're always going to struggle with those differences, because architects are trained in a certain way, planners are trained in a certain way, health professionals are trained in a certain way, and community people live then in a certain way. So unless we start all communicating and working together, we're never going to get over that hurdle. So I think that's the key. I think it's bringing people together for genuine co-creation and co-planning and relationship building. That's the essence of really hearing communities. And I just want to say one thing. There's a really great website at the moment that I've come across that we're going to try and implement here in Cork, the same approach. It's called citiespeoplelove.co/map. And what they're asking is, how would you love your city to be recreated? And every day they're drawing in people's ideas and they're adding their ideas with little buttons. So if you look at that, you can see that evolving. And I would say 90% of the ideas that are coming out of that are to do with nature, green spaces, blue spaces, a lot around equality, a lot around social inclusion, a lot about meeting loads of diversity and encouraging diversity, and it's really positive thing. So check that out if you get a chance. I'll put it up in the chat there, the link for it as well.
I think that you're speaking to as well with kind of that co-creation piece from like an equity standpoint as well. It's about that training is so important. That's like what we're doing a lot of work on in Philadelphia as well. It's like creating community ambassadors and liaisons who really feel that they're able to be part of those conversations. There's that first step, which I'm sure you know, of like, you know, one thing is to invite people in to be part of co-creation, but it's another thing to make sure that they feel confident and able to participate. So it's that capacity building piece is a big thing, particularly we've been doing in both countries actually, to make sure that from all different angles, because we're all speaking different languages, to kind of bring that capacity for all sides.
Can I just say that capacity building needs to be both ways though, and that the local authority planners and professionals need to see that their capacity needs to be built too, that it's not a top-down, we're the experts on placemaking or planning. It's actually, they have to be open to hearing as well, and that's the essence of a really good planner, I think, and architect and designers.
No, completely. I think we're starting to see that more, you know, like we're doing lunch and learns with Philadelphia City Council and helping with people in the city council to be able to actually do proper engagement and to understand how to speak like a universal, accessible language. Yeah. And I think that's exactly, you know, what's happening in Ireland as well. And to see with your project, like that idea of then getting them to learn together as well is critical. Yeah.
So, Noel, I know you're, thanks Denise. Do you want to comment on any of the questions?
Yeah, just to come in on that and to say how much I agree with Denise on this. For those from outside of Ireland, we have a planning system where we have development plans every 6 years. you start working on the next one in year 4 and complete it by year 6. The public have a chance to have an input into that process. Initially the councillors, then the public, and then councillors again before it's finalised. That's a very brief version of it. But the point that Denise is making, and the point I think that was made earlier on, is that it's very artificial. It's very pressurized for the planners who have a 2-year slot in which to bring forward the plan. There are timelines to be met. So I think the route that you're talking about going, I'm delighted to hear, but I wasn't aware of it, in Cork, where outside of the actual development plan process, you have real engagement between planners, local public representatives, I presume as well, local groups in the area, and an awful lot more collaboration or information gathering by modern means of communication, because not everybody will engage with the planning system. Some people will feel that they're excluded. Some people will feel in awe of these professionals, and some people will just reject it because they reject the system. I think working at a community level, making sure that the community make it clear what they want is really a good way to go, and I'd encourage it.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect way to just transition us on to our next theme, which is about movement in cities and making sure that that as well is done in this really collaborative, community-driven way, citizen-led way. So, from Connect the Dots, we've been really interested in working on projects that are building on the momentum that's been created as well by this drastic change in car traffic that we've been experiencing since the pandemic, and looking at how we can really change and reimagine how we approach movement in cities. It's a time to both reimagine public transit as kind of what we were all talking about in terms of optimizing not for efficiency, but actually for people and for safety and for socioeconomic outcomes instead. And then we're also looking at and working on projects at just multimodal transport in general, and pushing for more micro mobility options from walking to cycling. I know ties into both of your thinking as well. So I'd love to ask for your opinion and what you think. You can think of kind of one core thing you'd like to see change in terms of movement. And you can still relate that, of course, to the kind of collaborative way that we're talking about doing this in. Do you want to maybe go first, Denise, and then I'll go to you?
I mean, it goes back to what I said initially. I think if we plan cities for children, everything else falls into place. I think if we have, if children can navigate your city with comfort and safety, then you're doing really well as a planner. Yet we never engage with children. We never consult with them traditionally in Ireland. So I think it's about thinking through the lens of a child, and trying to design so that, they feel safe. And there's little things you can do. We did a little bit of work on the marina in Cork. We, instead of saying we were closing the marina to cars, we said we were opening it to play. So it's become known as the Open for Play initiative. And what that did is it demonstrated to people how if you change the use of the space, now this particular road, a car would have driven down it maybe every 20 minutes, but everybody lived in fear of going near the road and was on the footpath and confined, because the speed of the cars that did come. But when we closed it to cars and opened it to play, and we put toys out on the road, we chalked it up, we left chalk there was tug of war, there was giant Jenga, it transformed it. And this is a space that local councillors and local people for years have been really pushing hard to become pedestrianised, but there was a real pushback on it. But by demonstrating the closure of it to cars and the opening of it basically to families of all ages. I mean, the play wasn't just designed for children, but the fact that children and people with disabilities could utilise the space without fear really transformed it. So that's what I'd love to see, is that kind of childlike livable city. And, my line earlier was, children out and about in a city is an indicator species for a livable city. And when we were in Udine, we were involved in a European project called the Playful Paradigm. they have a thing called a ludibus, which is a bus full of toys that they park up in a plaza and they put out the toys. And we went to watch this happen. They unloaded the bus, and I've never seen anything like it. I had seen no children up until the point where the toys came out in the plaza, and it was like dropping a magnet and watching all these iron filings running from all corners of the plaza out to play. And suddenly the plaza was owned by children, because they transformed the space into a child-friendly space, and children were comfortable there. They didn't have any fear of traffic. There was no fear of falling or any of this. It just transformed. So that's what I'd love to see, is that kind of a lens of a child when you're planning a city, and when you're planning transport, and when you're thinking about navigating and movement. Can a child navigate the space easily? And if they can, then you're really providing a service for everybody.
Yeah, I think that relates a lot to our work with like a playful city as well. It's like a nonprofit we run on the side of Connect the Dots in our spare time, but it's really as well. Like, I think it's been interesting, like around play streets, but also the rise of the slow streets movement lately. And I think that's been really pushing forward. And I love the idea. I was reading an article the other day that described slow streets as essentially turning streets into the equivalent of suburban parking lots. So I thought it was a lovely way to kind of imagine it for people. So, yeah, if you want to maybe jump in, Noel, with your thoughts.
Just, very briefly, I think the one improvement, the saying, never waste a good crisis. And I think in fairness to Dublin City Council and Owen Keegan, they do seem to be trying to avail of the current crisis to allocate or reallocate road space around the city. Space being provided to facilitate pedestrians, cyclists, and so on. There is a problem as well in the crisis has caused a problem, obviously, for those in the hospitality sector as well. They want to spill out onto the streets, and I was interested in what David was saying there about New York and about the processes there. In Temple Bar, we're in discussion with Dublin City Council to try and get the whole area pedestrianised now because of the new norm. We have a planner in place to detail the space that could be used in the street safely for customers and for pedestrians. The City Council have agreed to have a look at a single application for the use of that space when we have the plan all made out. So I think the new normal, as we call it, or the new norm, is going to mean a huge amount of change in cities, in how we operate and how we visit, how we work and live in those cities.
I think just something that came up there when you're talking, and just I know we're going to get the next speaker in a second, but around kind of how do you convince the unconvincible? Because I think that seems to be, that's really what we're trying to get at, I think, here today, in terms of, we're all in agreement. We all have brilliant ideas, and we have, the best intentions. But how do you, yeah.
Well, I think the major thing to do is, when you have the opportunity, do it. Like the centre of Dublin, the centre of Dublin City was completely dead. End of March, April, May. They moved and did it. People are going to have a surprise when they come back into it. It will be difficult for people, but it's a fait accompli now to a certain extent. I know they're only temporary measures and so on, but it maybe make people think differently and see that it can actually work. There's a lot more work to be done, obviously, but I think it's moving in the right direction.
Yeah. Thanks, Noah.
I think we're going to bring on Katrina now, as well as David.
Yeah. So while we're waiting, actually, I want to highlight that we have a poll going, just out of curiosity, getting people's mode of transport, if everyone wants to fill that out. So it's the bottom of the screen on the left. Hi, Katrina.
We can't hear you.
Oh, here we are. You're yeah.
We're good. I did want to make a quick comment on the poll. I'm surprised at how much of a percentage is car and bike.
Yeah.
I did not expect that. I thought more public transportation and walking. I voted for walking. I do that more often. But yeah, so I think the big conversation here too, and I want to essentially echo Claudia's point, which is to say there's a lot of work to be done to undo a lot of what has been implemented, not only design-wise, but also just in terms of our understanding and communication. And this is very much so a United States conversation, of course, but obviously extends to other places as well. And really just thinking about what is the origin of the way in which we structure our streets and mobility. You know, who are the people in power who are influencing those decisions, who have decided to create the design in the way that it has been, that we think of as normal. You know, as human beings, we wake up, we see what's happening, we go, okay, this is the way the world works. I get a car, I drive on a street. And we often don't understand that the origin point of that is also an incredibly inequitable system just at its face value. You know, so not only was it created and managed by mostly middle-aged white males who were the ones who were driving to and from workplaces, but also the whole structure has been set up in many cases to overtly oppress certain individuals. And obviously mostly people of color in neighborhoods where they're cut off because of a highway construction. Yep. You know, the barrier to entry to the economic access to livability, as we say now, is completely gone. And obviously the barriers to entry to any kind of like economic mobility is also just completely gone for many of those same reasons. And so the ways in which we tie people into those systems and how interconnected those are, we need to fully recognize that and acknowledge it as a part of the transformation. And that's a lot of listening, obviously. But that's also a lot of calling that out and really knowing what we are undoing and why, and having that intention in place. And that gets to the heart of the co-creation, really having a shared vision based on the acknowledgement and the need to undo what has been done thus far in order to move forward.
Yeah, it has to be like completely proactive towards doing that, and a proactive untangling of what's already been woven in an unusual way.
And proactive in the inclusion, as you mentioned before, with regards to making sure you're looking at who is being talked to and who isn't, you know, who is included, who isn't. It's the same when you study a public space, like who is there, but who isn't. Yep. And really fully knowing that you need to make more of an effort to that extent. And this is, I think that we can fall into too much of a simplicity with regards to livability or to human-centered cities or human-centered design, because we need to know exactly what that is coming from. Who, livable for who, livable in what way, human-centered coming from what human, you know, and it's too easy to make that a blanket prescription onto the design of our streets, or our mobility or what, or transportation systems. But if you're talking about flipping the script and really getting down to the empathy, then that's where you get into, instead of, you know, human-centered by some select body of humans, it's a heart-centered city that is about that consciousness. And I know another speaker also mentioned that earlier, and really ensuring that what we're doing is for the highest and best of everyone, because the city is a community. It doesn't work. If it's not working for one person, it doesn't work for anyone.
And that relates to like even now during our COVID version of the world right now, making sure when it comes to remote engagement as well, that like we talked about in our article about reopening cities, that again, you have multiple different streams of engagement happening in multiple different ways, from fully remote to not, to allowing for some now socially distance as well, but making sure that the different streams reflect the different levels of input that people can provide and how they prioritize that engagement. And also to make people then feel comfortable in different spaces, so there's those opportunities, because that's really how you get that diverse input that we need to make a heart-centered city, which is about everyone's hearts, not just some. Will we throw it on to David now?
Yeah, for all, David.
Great.
There you go.
Yeah, and I just I really like the idea of I think empathetic cities, and you know, the notion that was brought up earlier about training not being a one-way street. I think that's a critical point, and something that, you know, really is important for professionals and kind of quote unquote experts working in the field to see training and planning as a co-creative process. You know, I think we've strayed a little bit from the sort of initial movement theme that we started with, but I'll kind of go with the conversation. U.S. cities are grappling, I think, in the open right now with an incredible, deep, and in some ways much deeper than people even realize, legacy of racism that was embedded in our policies, really going back to the late 1800s, but most clearly with redlining policies in the 1920s, and then with zoning in the 1930s and 40s. And as someone who really deals in I think the kind of technical world of planning often, which is a dangerous place to be in some ways. I think it's an incredible challenge of education to bring people into certain processes and to confront the real contradictions in those planning processes. And I want to give a kind of quick example of a project that I was working on in New York that revealed this to me. We were working with a predominantly historically African American community, largely single and two-family homes. And the community was seeing a significant number of teardowns. The teardowns were really happening because the kind of underlying zoning, the amount of density that you could have in those neighborhoods, was higher than it was in surrounding areas that had sort of been, what we call downzoned. And at the same time, Black home ownership rates were falling dramatically, largely because this sort of differential kind of the rate of density and just the value of those homes being much higher for large apartment buildings. And so we were brought in by a community to really evaluate what could be done and to kind of propose solutions from a very technical perspective, and work with them on kind of the way to approach the city to make those changes. What was interesting, and in New York City, the last 6 years really has been so focused on creating more affordable housing by adding density to neighborhoods, that when we came into this process, the sort of technical language that we were going to with the community was very much contradictory in terms of what they might expect, in terms of the tools of upzoning versus downzoning really not aligning with sort of their expectations about how to kind of create a good planning process, to create a process that met their expectations, to sort of preserve the character of their neighborhood while also preserving its affordability. And I think, and this is something that comes up, whether it's losing a lane for parking, or losing a lane for a bike lane, or taking away parking. A lot of our planning processes are sort of full of these contradictions. And as a result, as planners and professionals, there's often a kind of process of confronting a larger technical system that is imbued with these kind of significant traps that are hard to sort of solve your way out of. And so I think that for the COVID crisis most recently has really opened up the door to kind of fundamentally rethink certain institutions. And zoning is one that I deal with, and land use planning is one that I deal with all the time. And I think that the more that we can reshape the sort of fundamental fabric of some of these institutions to better meet the needs, expectations, and frankly, simplify the language of these policies so that people can actually participate, the better off and more effective planning and the sort of technical side of planning is going to be able to accommodate, people's aspirations and hopes for what their communities can look like.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and it's really great to get that insight. It's kind of, you know, why we want you guys here, to be able to share that American perspective. And I think that feeds a little bit more into that last theme we're going to have now, which I'll move into in a second, around, you know, effective consultation. So I think we can maybe touch on that again in the next bit. But I just kind of wanted to bring up two things really. One thing was just to give everyone a shout, a heads up that the ask a question function is still there if you wanted to ask any questions of any of the speakers. So it's just at the bottom on the left, but that's just a little heads up, because I'm conscious there's loads of great stuff happening in the chat, but maybe the questions are getting lost. So the other thing I wanted to kind of bring up, I suppose, related more to the theme of transport and mobility, was you know, stuff that we're learning around what's going on in Paris in terms of the 15-minute city, and just, you know, this idea of effective planning really that will allow for a more livable experience, and as well as being able to reduce your emissions, you know, being able to, you know, dwell with dignity, have proper conditions, be able to experience well-being, have, you know, be educated, have your leisure, go to work, have a really good quality of life within a certain radius. And I know that seems like a far off idea, especially in Ireland, with, you know, rural communities being so far apart. But I just wanted to maybe ask Katrina about that. I know maybe George might come up next on that one, but and I know David will be speaking to you now in a second. But Katrina, if you had any thoughts on that, or
Yes, and that's absolutely the inspiration we should be looking towards, not only because the mayor of Paris has said that the right to the city is one of her major imperatives for the changes that she's making, but also because she overtly comes from the subject with a feminist lens, in part because of the fact that women have had such a low level of impact on cities comparatively over time. And I mean time as in thousands of years of time. You know, the first female mayor of Paris coming out, or Barcelona, you know, Ada Colau, you know, coming out and saying, listen, we need bikes, we need protected bikeways, we need walking, we need to prioritize play, meeting, sociability, and that calm spaciousness of a city without cars in its streets. You know, that kind of value system has to be, again, very overt in its intention and in its vision. So she's an excellent example of really focusing on the local. And I think the pandemic has helped us focus on that a lot too. You know, if you can't walk very far, or if you aren't driving, or if the transportation system is down, you know, then what is your mobility? You know, can you get everything that you need within that 15-minute walk shed? You know, and who does and who doesn't? Once again, making sure that we're overtly filling in those gaps, and not only preparing for the next pandemic, but really preparing for life as it should be in a city anyway. So sort of almost compensating for what we haven't been doing up until now, right? And that's the whole point of this, being able to bring that into the future. But I think the biggest point there is, you know, we put all of these policies in place. We put the design in place as humans. You know, again, some of us do, some of us don't. But as a general principle, all of it is created. All of it is manufactured. The city is made. We make the city. We could remake the city to do whatever we want. You know, you can simply remove a policy if you want. You can prioritize a design change if you want, and you can do simple things that make huge, profound impacts in the way that people live their lives in an urban environment. And some of these things we can do tomorrow. And you know, the mayor of Paris saying that these things will persist beyond the pandemic is absolutely critical, because in the US, we're seeing some of these changes are only considered temporary. They're only for the pandemic purposes, and that cannot be the case. And I have hope and optimism in cultural change. Once people experience it, as was mentioned before, really understand that value, then they will continue to demand that. And I think that that's a barrier to entry for some of this, because the cities are potentially a bit afraid of what will happen when suddenly we all understand what a healthy, happy city really looks like.
Yeah. Like having data and insights from people in terms of like what we do together is making sure we have that kind of artillery to then kind of show what that impact was, and to be able to advocate for that to continue afterwards.
And it's just a softening of the linear notion of progress. You know, we think we need to go towards smart cities. We think we need to go towards autonomous vehicles. In reality, recentering, refocusing, and coming back to that social structure of the hyperlocal is going to be absolutely necessary for climate change and the future of humans on this planet.
Yep. Here.
No big deal.
A lot of those moments on this call, I think, around. Yeah, let's just do that. Let's just get it done. So thanks for that, Katrina. I'm going to move on to the next section. So that's the last final theme that we have, and then we'll do kind of a final roundup with questions. But so I'll thank David for his contribution now. I think we'll probably bring you back on maybe in a little bit. I think we're also getting George and Claudia hopefully up at some point. But I suppose just to introduce this area, really we're talking about lots of really brilliant innovations and ideas and improvements to the cities, but how do we make it happen, and how do we encourage people to take risks and experiment with change, and what role can stakeholder and community engagement play in all this? Obviously, from our angle, we're banging the drum of consultation being the core, reason for being, and that's what will change everything in terms of making sure everything is built with and for people. So there's structural changes, I suppose, in terms of partnerships between municipalities, in the private sector, and more equitable collaboration with communities. So it's a real shake-up of all those structures, or the kind of the culture that we see of participation, or the lack of participation. And so I suppose it's kind of a bit of a mixed theme of citizen engagement and stakeholder engagement, and also risk-taking. So how do we just take the leap and get into that gritty stuff and that kind of complex stuff, which does take time to build up trust and to maintain relationships with communities and with other groups. So that's my kind of long-winded spiel, but my core question for these guys now is really exploring this topic of the role of community and stakeholder engagement in moving these innovative ideas forward. Like what do you see in that, or how would you kind of respond to that? Maybe we'll go with Claudia first.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think it's about taking ownership. And I think, as Katrina rightly said, we make communities, and I think just communities, I want to say demanding, and I know that's a strong word, but demanding that kind of responsibility for their safety is taken seriously, and demanding that spaces are not just not only beautiful and functional and all of those things that are super important, but also safe and inclusive. And I've just been following the chats there, and I know there's been several comments on, I suppose, making spaces, for example, more playful, but not forgetting that safety element. And I think just that having that, taking maybe more ownership, which is something that I don't think we've seen a huge amount of, maybe especially in Dublin, just, ownership of spaces in general and how they function, and feeling the power to be able to influence the changes around that. I think that is really vital, and I think it's probably to do with the fact that having, as I mentioned earlier, more profit-led sort of methods to looking at cities potentially has disempowered people over generations. And I think it's about there's a mindset shift that's necessary, and there's something about bringing people back to a people-centered, empathy-centered approach to looking at it. So
yeah, I think,
those are my thoughts.
No, totally. I think when we talk about it's such a common thing that comes up around this kind of disempowerment of communities, of everyone, of the everyday citizen. Mm-hmm. That's just that they're not engaged in the kind of a civicness or civic mindedness. But actually, there's also a disengagement or a disempowerment of leadership. Nearly, if the ownership isn't there, it's a lack of leadership. And so there's actually it's really the question is, how do you empower the leaders to be effective leaders? Because an effective leader will bring people with them rather than charging ahead or whatever it is.
And those structures in place to allow for people to feel like they can own the city. If I remember, we were doing that Playful Street in Dublin, and we've learned that when we were prepping for it, a lot of the citizens were saying, like how fast cars would whiz down their street and there's children playing, how dangerous that is. And we were like, why don't you say something to the council? Like, oh no, that's not up to us to say. Like that's not our role. Which was really interesting, because it's also that education element of what is the right to the city. And then, like Naomi's saying, from the leadership perspective, we need to actually give that right to people so they can actually feel that they have it. So, do you have anything to add to that, George, from what we're talking about?
Yeah, I lots to say. I don't know where to start. So I suppose it's very much along the lines of this personal responsibility thing is absolutely vital. So I suppose in the last 10 years, a lot of the work that I've been doing in entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship has been trying to bring social entrepreneurships out of the charity mindset and bring corporates out of the sort of, we're free to do what we like mindset and bring them into the center where there's a social enterprise, which means it can wash its own face, it can plow its own furrow, it can look after itself, but it is serving a need as well as making money, and that money, whether it's directed into the pocket of shareholders or back into the social economy is a matter for people to decide. So I found that that's been really successful. When it comes to the question about stakeholder engagement, I find as well, and this is very much along the lines of what one of your previous questions was, I think, Tig, about how to motivate and how to persuade people in positions of authority to play ball. And an awful lot of that is about behavior, as people have said, about making people aware and also making people kind of less afraid of the otherness of other people. And I think that is at the heart of any kind of ism or any kind of institution. But bringing those kind of mindsets into the center are really about personal responsibility at the lower decks, if I can say, like the grassroots level. These people need to be empowered and to feel that the responsibility is theirs, that there isn't a kind of a futile ceiling that they'll be constantly banging their head against. And at the other level, that people don't feel afraid of losing the position that they have. Because in a position of privilege, the threat is always, is the other going to deny me of what I have established for myself? That's what privilege is all about. So in a councillor's shoes, that privilege is being elected. In an executive officer, a Dublin City Council, or any local authority or any municipal authority, it's sustaining their position and keeping their job, which is really about making their business successful, which is measured in money and not in social impact. So what I'm getting at here is, during the crisis in Ireland, I'm not sure how it went down everywhere else, but there was this extraordinary moment from all the many, many sectors that I'm engaged with, where I found, because we were at the end of an election process that wasn't resolved, we had no government, we had no mandate, there was no authority, there was total chaos, it was all unstructured. What happened was the right thing was getting done. The right thing was done everywhere. People who were in the position, like you're a nurse or a doctor because you want to care for people, but then the system doesn't allow it because there's bureaucracy and there's a hierarchy and you're fighting against the tide. Because that system of authority wasn't there, people were getting the job done. Now, as I said earlier on, I mean, maybe they were getting the right thing done for the wrong reasons, but I kind of love the refreshing nature of that. Like cycle lanes were put down. Direct provision looks like it's about to be completely abolished, and I mean, these are people who got into roles that they believed in, suddenly stamping papers and getting things passed and issuing bills up to the Senate and having them issued out without a political agenda, without a mandate for anyone taking responsibility. Okay, there's no accountability, but isn't it great that the stuff got done? And this relates then to, how do you actually turn that into a kind of a guidebook or handbook for people? And Seth Godin has a great quote on this. People rarely believe what you tell them. They rarely believe what you show them. They will generally believe what their friends tell them, and they will always believe what they tell themselves. But it's only leaders who can tell them a story that they can visualize, a narrative they can believe in, and that it has a kind of a pathway, and you have to pave that pathway, and you have to lay it down, and you have to take people by the hand. But that's an exercise in leading being among the horses. You're not the chariot rider. You're one of them. You're with them, and you go together. If you try to lead from a position of authority, you're only ever going to create a kind of a parental role. So you're guiding somebody who assumes a position of inferiority. So equality is a very complex thing, but I think we've really achieved it in our community in Fumbally. It's something where people will come to you and say there's no milk, and you go, right, okay. So it's kind of learning to make decisions and key decisions and contributions, and the more you exercise your power to contribute, the more courage and confidence you have to move up the ladder of making a better place.
Thanks, George. That's great. No, that's brilliant. Thank you for your insights. We're just going to move on to the last few speakers before we have to close it out. And we're going to have Noel, I think, and who else? Denise, I think. So, but I thank you guys for what you were saying. And if anyone has any questions, you can ask them specifically on the Ask a Question. And one thing I was going to say was that I might have to log off quickly at some point just before the end. So if you see me disappearing, that's what's happening. But I have to run another session now. So with Agent Opportunity, actually, so that relates as well to the kind of consultation of different types of people is, how do we encourage older people to get involved, and what are their requirements of public space and transport? And we haven't heard from you guys in a while. So hello, Noel and Denise.
Hi.
So
I
no,
about older people, if you like.
Yeah, and you were also going to mention about younger people as well. I know you mentioned it before, but
there's a range. I suppose the key, I think, when you're engaging and you're planning anything is to look around and see what structures already exist rather than trying to tap into or access specific communities. So like the age-friendly cities or the age-friendly fora that exist around the city are a great way of engaging with older people. And they're older people that are, really engaged in the city and know what's going on. And I suppose they're empowered to speak up and talk about what their needs are. We did some safety work in Cork with the age-friendly cities because the National Health Survey just highlighted that safety was an issue in Cork City for older people. And when we got down to it and we started asking them in a qualitative sense what the safety issues were, it was concerns around coming into the city centre, concerns around using footpaths because cyclists were on them, concerns around going into public parks because there was a perception that there was lots of drug dealers and drug using and that they might be attacked. And I suppose fear was the basis of it. So I think it's important when we ask people that you get into the nitty gritty, because when we were thinking safety, we were thinking people were afraid they'd be mugged or robbed or whatever, but it actually was a simple thing like cycling on footpaths that kept them out. So like, I think it's important if you are looking at engaging with specific communities, engage with existing structures. It's faster, it's easier, and you're also working with people who understand that community better and have the means of getting you out and about. And I think it's important to do it in a qualitative way. There's an air quality survey in Cork City at the moment, and it's a tick box, multiple choice, and there's so much more I'd love to be able to say in that consultation than what's being asked. So get people into a room and talk to them and listen would be something that I'd be saying, and look out for what's already there and what's in place. Don't go reinventing the wheel or trying to set up a group,
Yeah, exactly. That's brilliant. So no, I'll let you jump in there.
Yeah, just two very quick points. It was really when George was talking, I was very interesting. It's funny when politicians have only experts. On the one hand, they had fear of the consequences of not taking the expert advice. They took the expert advice and did it very, very well. And they did, through their leadership, convey that to the public and made it acceptable to the public. And it's really, in the context of local government, two things that I think are extremely important. And you were asking about this earlier on, Naomi. The openness and approach from the planners and real engagement at the local level that Denise and I talked about earlier on. We're like a double act, Denise. But the second thing is that what we don't have in Ireland is a strong system of real local government.
Yeah.
So at a local level, people can hide. If we had directly elected mayors for our cities and towns, they wouldn't be able to hide. They would have to make decisions and would be accountable to people. When you can blame central government, you're inclined to hide. So I think that's a lesson that we should learn from the system that we have.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I think there's a great point there by Bernadine about Irish young people, that they feel stigmatized in public spaces. There's a perception in Ireland that when there's young people hanging out somewhere, that there's something wrong with that, or that it's, that it's an affliction on society. when there's young people gathering somewhere, it means the space is good for them, that it's, you know, it's working for them, and maybe it could work better for them if, you know. So I think we need to look at that as well, and our attitudes towards young people. So I think that's a well-made point, just to come in there and that.
Yeah, no, thanks for catching that, Denise. Yeah, one thing I just realized now is that we've wonderful illustrations that were made by Emer, who's been recording everything. So, and I was meant to show them all the way throughout, and I've completely forgotten. So, I might just ask, might say goodbye to Denise yet for a second, and I'll just share my screen to show you the wonderful drawings. It'll just take me 2 seconds.
So we try to make our, as you can see, these things more interactive and engaging. So what we did have this live illustrator in the background who was really trying to capture everything that people were saying. And we'll be sharing these out later as well, so you can have a closer look. But it'd be interesting to just, as a way to also just kind of summarize and reflect on what we've all talked about today, we can just have a look at this together.
Ooh. Sorry.
We zoom back out and then you can see it.
There was going to be something that went wrong. I knew it. Anyway, so okay, so this is the one for public spaces. She has healthy cities in there. This one was for, yeah, public spaces still, planning.
You can see, yeah, a lot of ideas about trust. What is
Puffins and gulls.
Yep.
Yeah. And this is just the welcome at the beginning. So I suppose that's what she has for now, and I suppose it'll be great to share that with you after. She does amazing work, so we're really delighted that she was with us today, and I think it'll be great to send it out to you after, along with our feedback survey as well. I'm going to have to jump off, but I'll leave you in the very capable hands of Marissa. And I know we'll be asking questions from the audience as well now. Emer McNally is the illustrator. And we'll be asking questions from the audience, and we'll be back in touch very soon. So thanks, everyone, for participating.
Okay. Talk to you soon, Naomi.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
I'd love to hear from some attendees as well. And just let us know on the chat if you'd like to come up and say something, particularly, I guess, around our topic of engagement. But if there's something that you feel like you'd like to add from the other topics as well, then just post it there on the chat and we'll bring you up. So I will wait for my next victims. Let's see. Don't see any victims yet. What about, is Douglas there from AECOM? Is he around? Nope. Any Philly representation in the room? Okay. What about Martina? I don't think we've heard from you yet directly. Can we throw you up there? All right. Okay, Doug's there. So let's throw up Doug and Martina, making you our next victims. All right, I think you've been invited, so you just have to click yes, and then you'll be brought onto the screen. All right, connecting. We'll just hear from a couple more attendees and then we can wrap today up, and we'll be sending you, well, we have a recording of this that we'll be editing and making it really manageable for everyone and interesting. And there we go. We have Doug now. Hi.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
All right.
So do you want to kind of chat about just any thoughts you have based on this conversation so far? You know, you're doing a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just chime in and say this has been great. I'm glad somebody was making the illustrations, because a lot of those are the same notes I was taking, trying to write down good quotes and stuff to kind of share to our team internally. I mean, I think the thing that really resonated with me, because I have 2 young kids, is the idea of designing cities for children. That, like, completely resonated with me, and really felt silly that that hadn't occurred to me before, especially as a professional planner. But I think you get caught up in planning as this, you know, capital P profession, and we're always trying to. I always struggle with my role as a professional and trying to be an expert in these things, and how to communicate that, communicate those issues to to citizens and people. It's a struggle. So I like the idea of engaging children and figuring out how to design for children, and then realizing that everything else is probably going to fall into place. So that to me really is I think my favorite takeaway of today's discussion.
And it really does fall into, like, we do our like playful city perspective and that child focused, but it does fall a lot into also like from differently abled people as well.
Yeah.
And so if you design for children, then it does really help create accessible cities, and like kind of that universal design standpoint as well, that we can kind of make sure all the different types of users in a city feel like it's for them.
Yep.
Yeah. Martina, I know you do a lot of work around this level as well. So would you like to chime in too? Oh, wait, I don't think I can hear you. Okay, go ahead. No. Crowdcast is slowly breaking on us at the end. I don't know why I can't. Okay, we're trying in the background to fix it. Just make sure you're not muted at the bottom. No. It might help if you take your headset off. Sometimes that.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Go ahead.
Oh, brilliant. That was a bit so I'm Martina Callan, and I'm from Galway City in the west of Ireland, and I'm spokesperson for Galway Cycle Campaign. So we're all about making cycling and walking safer for people of all ages and all abilities everywhere. I'm big on the word all. I feel there's a speech bubble done of my Twitter accounts and the press releases over the last few months. All ages and abilities would feature very, very highly. So yeah, the idea is like a safe city is a city where a 5-year-old can go out to play and you feel grand about it. A safe city is where a cocooner during lockdown, a city should be where a cocooner feeling it's during lockdown, that they can go to the park and walk to the local shop, and the absence of fear. That's what a safe city is. And for me, where my professional background is around strategic communications and working in change organizations and trying to get people to change their behavior. And it sounds very simple, and it's not. And it's really about recognizing change has to come at a couple of different levels and stages. And it depends where people are at and the context in which they're in. So like right now in a global pandemic, when people are sick and dying of a mysterious, new, frightening disease, like people's brains can only hold so much information. And you take people who are there and you bring them on a journey. And that was a really interesting pointer about information. Information isn't enough. Like we all know that we're supposed to, walk X amount per day and eat this, and we don't do it. So it's not an information deficit we have. Having the right idea and having the right research is irrelevant again. I don't care. I have to take my toddler for a walk. I'm trying to potty train somebody. My mom is sick. You have to make things easy for people to give. So at all points in time, when I'm engaging with communities and with local authorities and elected representatives, it's all about creating allies, building bridges, giving people opportunity to support and come on and take them from where they are, not where you want them to be, where they are.
Yep.
And removing barriers to support, neutralizing fears, and really that we talk about stakeholder engagement is like what's the vision here, what do we all want, and then it's just like point the ship forward, and like that's the direction we're going in. So
and removing barriers for engagement as well, and
absolutely.
So it relates to the process and the end product too.
They're absolutely connected. The quality of both.
Yeah,
there's a correlation there. So there is. Yeah,
exactly. All right.
Yeah, we're here in Galway this week, really exciting, at the Joint Policing Committee. So that's a function of our local authority system. The Chief Superintendent of the Western Division of An Garda Síochána, so this is the entire western part of Ireland, publicly said that he backs slower speed limits in Galway City, 30 km/h speed limit in Galway City. This is
That's amazing.
huge. It's amazing. And it hasn't happened in Ireland before.
Yeah.
So councillors in Dublin, cross-party support for this measure, before the Garda Síochána kind of leading it here now in Galway in the west of Ireland is huge. And it means that other local authorities can now follow, and other Gardaí can now follow as well.
Once that initial fear is passed, and you can see it can work. Yep.
Yeah. So
thanks for letting us know about that. That's great.
You're welcome. We're very excited here.
Yeah, I hope it comes to Dublin.
I hope so too. Thanks, Emil.
Thank you. All right, so I think we're gonna pop you off now. There you go. And so yeah, I just wanted to close off today, and thanks everyone for staying with us. We had an amazing time and amazing conversations with all of you, and I know the chat was really going fast, and there's a lot of just interesting, I think, synergies between everyone in this room. So we would love personally to keep this going. That is why we do have a poll. If you scroll down, when you click poll, scroll down, and there's a second poll that talks about what next steps might be to move on from this conversation, and kind of viewing this conversation as launching pad for moving forward together, like we've been talking about. So have a look at that, and if you can respond to what you think, that would be great. You can see here, what would you like to see as next steps after this discussion? And that's the question. So we'll give you some time to fill that out. And just to recap, we'll be sending out the illustrations after this, so you can look more closely at them and just recall what we talked about. We've also been furiously having our team type away and record what everyone's been saying, and we'll be capturing the chat as well afterwards. So we'll make sure to wrap that all up in a nice way for everyone and send that on afterwards too. And tomorrow you'll be getting a feedback survey from us as well to, again, talk about how this conversation went and see where you want to bring it forward. So thank you so much, everybody. It's been a great participation and just an amazing time with you. So thank you. We'll talk to you soon. I'll leave it on for a minute just to allow people to fill out that poll. If anyone has any last comments, feel free. It's already happening, so type them in there. And it was really great, I think, from the Connect the Dots perspective too, because we have our branch in the US now and in Ireland, to be able to bring people together in that way too, and really capitalize on the learnings that we've been learning in both countries and figure out how to even better create that transatlantic connection and that learning pathway. So thank you. And I think just to sign out, you can just click the top X. I don't think there's other ways to exit. So we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.